All right. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. It's so great to reconnect with you, my friend. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Calling in all the way from California. And we were just talking a little bit about this pandemic and how it's really impacted you as a startup in the education space. And so I'd love to hear maybe what's the best part about being the CEO for a startup and what's been the toughest part?
Uh, the best part is that I guess I think the best part for me is that I think this is the like most impact I can have on K-12. That's all I'm really looking for out of my own personal job. Of course, it's like satisfying in a bunch of different ways, but yeah, that's the best part. The toughest part is, having to make tough decisions about people, for sure. Like, I think we really try and be humans about everything. And it's hard to make decisions that benefit all the stakeholders of a company all the time. And so we have to make decisions like that, I think, pretty frequently. I mean, not just with our corporate employees, but even like as a business that has, say, schools and substitute teachers, like having to decide between them, those sides, when we're trying to make product decisions or whatnot too.
Just for our listeners' benefit, what is it that you guys do at Swing?
Yeah, we provide substitute teachers to schools and districts, and we've been at it about 6 years now. Work with about 2,500 schools nationwide, about 4,000 substitute teachers, and um, have been really fortunate to be able to help a lot of schools and substitute teachers.
And that service has been around for a while, but what are you guys doing differently? What's the innovation that you're bringing to subs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a slightly different approach to it. I think what we try and do is really provide each substitute teacher with as many opportunities across any school district that we're working with. And then on the school district side, I would say, we're trying to make sure that they also are providing the best experience to substitute teachers so that they can get the highest fill rates with the highest quality substitute teacher. And we use technology to do that. So I think we allow school districts and substitute teachers to have a lot more choice and freedom as far as, say, pay rates to substitute teachers, or from a substitute teacher perspective, what kind of jobs they will or will not accept. um, and really, I think it comes down to choice and transparency and making sure that everyone gets to make the best decisions for themselves. And we just believe that that will lead to the best outcomes on all for all parties, including ourselves.
That's awesome. I love that choice and transparency. That's a great motto that many companies would benefit from adopting. I think um, gets into a strong culture, I would think. So, talk to us a little bit about how you think about being a CEO in a startup context. I know it's been a few years, but how do you think about growing your team? How do you think about creating a positive culture for people to work in?
Yeah, I think we've tried to be pretty intentional about culture. Although I think the interesting thing is, like, the farther along we get, the more it seems like there's just so many unintentional things that happen with culture along the way. I think where we've been super fortunate is that me and my two co-founders actually all went to high school together. So
Hmm.
we went to high school together here in the Bay Area, and so I've known them for over 20 years. And so that's where I would say a lot of the unintentional culture comes from. And I think it's been good. I mean, we trust each other really deeply, and so I think that that also builds sort of this like camaraderie amongst the rest of the team that comes in. There's definitely been some, like, I don't want to call them downsides, but like maybe unintentional things that creates some challenges around too. This feeling that, like, it might be really difficult to kind of break into that inner circle because I'm never going to actually have a 20-year long friendship with, Mike or Asha or Oz. Um, but I think those are then things that like get highlighted and then we try and work through them too. But yeah, I mean, I think culture is how we try and build a team. I mean, that's certain skill sets and things like that are actually pretty easy to find in a lot of ways. It's like finding the intersection of that and what is the like right person that's going to succeed at swing, not just like succeed anywhere kind of.
So how do those, you said those, when those things get highlighted, meaning you gave the example of the sort of this inner circle of
Yeah.
trust that's been built over 20 plus years. How do those things get highlighted?
Um, I think it's like they can sometimes be blind spots for us, right? Like I definitely didn't think of it as like we were creating any kind of barrier. I thought the fact that like I've been friends with them so long and the fact that we can say kind of anything to each other meant all good things. And instead, I think sometimes we ended up hiring people that then later were like, wow, like something I've felt for the last few months is it is really hard to kind of like, you guys have your own language together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe inside jokes that go back to high school. And, I think you don't see that the same way when you're like in it. And so it does take sort of like having some of those more direct conversations with hires, new people that have been added to the team, to start to see them and then start to like do something about it. Maybe the first thing to do about it is really to just acknowledge that you agree it is happening and that you want to do something about it. And that opens the door for more people to maybe like highlight examples. And then you can actually just then kind of like try and make corrections from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the courage it takes though to speak up, especially that first time, and to highlight it, like you said, I would imagine
Yeah.
is not easy. So I get what to do once it's highlighted, but and it sounds like you guys take it seriously, which is great. It encourages it in the future. But how did you even get to that first few highlighters?
I don't know. I mean, you kind of hire the right, like, that's definitely something that we were hoping to find through culture. And like, you probably basically just have to prove it to people. Extending vulnerability in other ways, so that you can build that trust, I think is like pretty important. I think transparency helps a lot because I think then people can see that you're not kind of secretly trying to like do something against anybody else. But I think making people feel like you really are, I think for us, maybe one secret is like that we are a very mission driven company. I know a lot of companies say that they're mission driven, but I feel like education is much more tangible as like a mission. And so then it becomes much more um, obvious to people that they should speak up if something's getting in the way of that. Um, and I think like if we as founders make it really clear that that's ultimately what we care about, we're not here to like just stand on top of people that we've hired, then that's great. But I think it's just like a slow kind of like social proof thing. I don't know that there's any fast ways to build trust.
Well, there's so much in what you said there, Mike, that I think is fantastic. This one idea that being on a mission, right, which is different than having a mission statement.
Right.
That a lot of companies confuse the two things, and being on a mission together means we're more committed to that future and to that mission that we're on than we are to our own comfort, our own,
Right.
our own stuff, our own egos, whatever. And it sounds like you've done a masterful job of really building a team of folks that is on a mission together, and so they're willing to have the quote unquote uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, sometimes it's a little hard to tell, in the interview screening process, but we try and do our best to make sure that that's where people's heads are at. I will say, I think, given the industry we're in, we're not like the highest paying job you can get out there. And especially in Silicon Valley, I would say, you can almost always find a job at Google or Apple or Facebook that pays really well, especially when you consider like stock grants and things like that. And so I think it's kind of funny in that sense, like you tend to attract people, one, that actually are genuinely interested in startups because there might be more lucrative options otherwise. And then two, there are a lot of like higher flying startups, more visible in Silicon Valley. And so the ones that like end up kind of looking our way probably are already, there's like a self-selection thing there. So again, I think that there's just some like luck that has to do with that. And I don't know that I think this has been something that's like called out, but I think I actually did work in ed reform, and so I think that that also like provides some level of like authenticity for our employees too. Um, it would be tough to have done 5 years at a charter school, working at a charter school, just so that I could fleece people into authenticity 5 years down the line.
Yes, it's not who you're
Had to be a
being.
long con.
The ultimate ridiculous con, right? Making
Yeah,
less money, working longer hours, and all to make less money later.
right. All to trick people into getting into education to do my bidding.
Yeah. Well, and that was no small organization either. I mean, Rocket Ship is pretty famous internationally, and your time there certainly adds to your credibility too, I would imagine.
I'd like to think so. But yeah, it was super fun. I loved working at Rocket Ship. I think I learned so much. I'm already sort of maybe by nature kind of a curious, intellectually curious person for sure, but also like when I want to be, I can be very nosy. And so I think I ended up involving myself maybe in a lot of conversations at Rocket Ship that I really like shouldn't have been in. Hopefully I added some value, but I certainly got a lot out of it by learning a lot about, I don't know, how schools, education, even school districts, even though we weren't a public school district. I think there's always like cultural, like I often kind of describe education decision making as like very, very consensus driven. And that like a lot of people have veto power. And so it's kind of where I see some of this like risk aversion coming from is just it's really easy for one person to step up and say like, I don't like that idea, even if it's not really their department, and it kind of can like really like gum things up. I think that that's true as much in like any kind of school operation almost. A lot of stakeholders, the outcomes
Mhm.
are like a lot more ambiguous than kind of the business environment. And so it's like really easy to hold things up and hard to push things through.
I love this that you said being nosy. I think that's actually great advice for young folks out there who are just maybe starting their careers, or they're looking to take on more responsibility or to become a leader in some way. That what I like I hear you saying is that it's not really about being like annoying and noisy. It's about a nosy. It's about using your intellectual curiosity to put yourself into situations, to learn and to ask questions and to be curious and to
Yeah,
constantly
I mean, you're going
pushing.
to make the best decisions even for your own work if you have the more context, right? I mean, this is something that a lot of organizations struggle with all day long, including ourselves, is like you've given some person a work stream, some task, and they're going to make decisions on how to do that, which is great. And then those decisions are going to impact other teams. I mean, like it's really rare these days to find any work in like a business environment that doesn't actually like impact people other than yourself, right? So like I think like more often than not, something you do might impact others, and understanding that impact is probably super important. And the higher up you go, obviously, the more like that becomes true. But like you're saying, I think it would be awesome for more young people who are ambitious and want that, which I think is a lot of like, I think, what is it? Millennials always want to kind of, they're already like, they come in thinking about their next promotion already sometimes,
Mhm.
which is okay. I'm a zennial, so I kind of get it.
So what advice would you give them? That there is a distinction there that I think is important. There's a sort of self-serving, nosy characteristic of like, I just want to be promoted because I'm amazing. And
Yeah.
there's a what I think I hear you saying is different than that. What's the distinction?
Um, I think the distinction is that just like you shouldn't just care about yourself. And as long as that's the case, again, I think like the hack here for Swing is like it's a mission-driven organization, right? So like if you do just care about yourself, it probably isn't really going to get you where you need to go. I think the other thing is like being a marketplace or two-sided kind of business, you really do have to understand more context to make the best decisions. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely not being annoying and seeing how you can actually help other people do their jobs goes a long way. Um,
I'm not a
yeah.
big fan. I'm not a big fan of what you just said there, Mike. I got to push back. You said one of our hacks at Swing is mission. And I think you just took like a really powerful concept, which most organizations frankly miss or they're not
Yeah,
good at, which is like you got to get your team on a mission, because if you do that, that's like the magic sauce. And it's
for
much,
sure.
much
I,
more
I
than
call it a hack because for us, it feels like cheating sometimes, right? Like it's like automatic and inherent in a lot of what we do. Granted, look, I mean, we do a lot of work to make sure that it's still top of mind for everybody all the time. And I think that there's even things that we try and do to make people understand their impact on a daily or weekly basis. We have a channel, a Slack channel that I promise this was an ironically named thing, but you'll probably recognize it. No offense, because we call the channel Show Me the Money, um, which we definitely had early employees that were very young that had never seen the movie Jerry Maguire and were like, this feels really like kind of greedy sounding. Um, Oh, we called it Show Me the Money, ironically, because we ended up having a lot of people that just wanted to understand what is the impact that I'm having each day. And especially early on, it was like, oh, we just recruited this substitute teacher. We saw them take this job at this school. And then we would have this channel that would automatically update with how many sub days we were doing this week, next week, and in the future, and in the last couple of weeks. And you could just see the trajectory. Like you would from 1 minute to the next actually see the number of sub days in a given week go up when someone accepted it. And it was so validating because another thing that I think is like nice about our business is that was different from working in schools was when you're working in schools, you sort of have this thing where you're waiting like 20 years to find out if the kids you're helping end up being happy and successful.
Mhm.
It's a long time. And it's like, you know, you use other proxies, like maybe test scores or even just like other assessments or anything else really. Um,
Which are
but in,
mostly terrible and not terribly helpful, but
yeah,
you know.
a lot of cons there too with doing that. But for us, it was like, oh, you know what? Like a school needs a substitute teacher tomorrow. We provided a substitute teacher. Granted, there's some ways that that can go wrong, but most of the time it goes right.
Mhm.
And you get to feel good about that. Like it's so easy. And again, I call it a hack, but it's because I think of the sort of simplicity of it that makes it so like nice. But to your point, it's super, super important and like incredibly like powerful.
So what are some other things that you and your team do to sort of nurture that culture where we're constantly helping to remind ourselves and remind each other what mission we're on?
You know, I think we try and have events annually. It hasn't taken place in the last year or so, but like our substitute teacher events are super fun. I mean, getting to actually see them. A lot of our, I mean, obviously, certain people's jobs is to talk to like school district customers and things like that too. And we try and have people pass those comments through too. Um, and then there's just some like, I don't know, some stuff that maybe sounds very corporate, but I think if you do it right, it can be really nice too, which is like we have a channel that's like people just like thanking coworkers for something that they did or helped out with, or in some cases above and beyond. And it's really nice. I mean, I think that a lot of those things all tie back to um, work that we're doing because of the mission.
Hmm. Yeah, I always found it interesting. One of the things that I tried to do was write a handwritten note to at least 3 or 4 people every week, and I'd actually have my EA like hold me accountable for doing it. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was always amazing to me how much that meant to people. Just a simple
Yeah.
simple handwritten note. And I think a lot of it's not because of me, but because of the CEO title.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That is a fascinating thing.
What is?
The CEO title and its power, I guess, or authority or perceived power or authority. Maybe it's not just perceived. Sometimes maybe it's like um, it actually exists for sure. I remember it from when I was an employee, um, but it's weird. to have that when like it's just kind of, especially in a startup where it's just like it feels like a fake thing. Like we had three people, three founders, and someone just like had to do it. And honestly, I feel like I ended up in it almost by default, because we originally had a couple more people that were like working on this with us, and like they both basically, when we wanted to commit to it full time, just couldn't for personal reasons.
Hmm.
And one of them was a friend of mine who was a serial entrepreneur, and I actually had just assumed the whole time that he would be the CEO. And then he wasn't, and he was like, "You should do it," and I was like, "Okay, sure." I never like, I didn't like, I'm not somebody that thought of myself, say like 10 years ago, as like a person that I definitely am going to be a founder someday. I think there's people like that. My co-founder and CTO, I would tell you, knew his whole life sort of that like he was going to be a founder of a company. And I think there's even people that feel like they're going to be a startup CEO and founder. And I think I was like neither of those things, but here we are.
Yeah, yeah. Here you are, and in your head, you're just Mike, right? But to
Yeah,
the rest of the world, you're the CEO who
right.
carries a lot of weight. So what do you do with that? You can ignore it, pretend like it doesn't exist, but it sounds like you're not doing that. What do you do with that?
You actually, well, I don't think you can pretend it does, or I don't think you can pretend it doesn't exist and be successful for very long. Um, One, I would say, look, I think it's true that I ended up by default as CEO, but I also think like I enjoy it. I don't feel guilty or badly about being CEO. I think I do a reasonable job at it. I don't think I would sit here and tell you I'm the best CEO. Um, but I think it's fun. And so like, what do you do with it? I think like there's a lot of influencer power to like make the company better, make people's jobs better. I think that's super rewarding, super fun. I think, and I think you can, one of the hopes that I think we have at Swing is that like we can be just a good place to work too, for our corporate employees, for our substitute teachers. Um, and I think that, you know, you can do that a bunch of different ways. One of them is definitely, again, through culture, and like hopefully finding people that really want that culture and maybe aren't going to get it in a lot of other places. But genuinely caring about people, I think, is something that you can do as CEO that to your point, like little handwritten notes go a long way. Actually, literally is something that I did, a handwritten Christmas card or holiday card. I forget what year it was, 3 years ago, maybe, to all of our employees. And, you know, it was like actually a decent amount of work. But people really like thought it was nice. And I think I did it again, also knowing that people would think it was nice, but I think it was like maybe received better than I even thought it would be.
Mhm. Yeah, because you were genuinely being nice, because that's who you are. It's hard to fake that. People can see right through the phony CEO, who writes a handwritten card that's photocopied, or
Yeah.
whose
Yeah.
whose executive assistant does it for them. So what advice would you give to a startup CEO where you were a few years ago, where they're making that decision, which is a pretty huge leap, right? To jump into the startup world. What advice would you give them?
Um, you know, for us, I think actually everyone's situation is pretty different. We were really lucky. I mean, and this probably gets into like a fair amount of like privilege in a lot of different ways. But you know, all three of us as founders were really lucky in that we'd already had, I'd say, like reasonably long careers and like successful ones, like or maybe financially successful careers. So like good jobs, you know, big four firms, or like I was a software engineer for 6 years. Oz, our co-founder, I don't know why I'm pointing this way, like he's right there. Maybe in the office he would be. You know, also a software engineer for 10 years. And so we were able to go use our savings to kind of start the company, for one. But we also all had working spouses, again, with kind of like equally good jobs, if not better, from a like income standpoint. And I think it made it very low risk, honestly, for us to start the company. Because if it didn't work out, I always told myself, if this doesn't work, I'll go back to Rocket Ship. I was happy there, and I think they'd take me back. Maybe that wasn't true. I don't know. We'd have to talk to Rocket Ship about it, but that's what I told myself. So it was kind of no risk in my mind in that sense. I think where it became risky was feeling like we were going to hire, like when we hired employees. And then, the first employee that we hired was single. So like we had to then start providing health insurance, which is the thing we didn't have to do because we all relied on our spouse's work plans. We had to pay her, which we didn't even have to do with ourselves up until that point. And so there was
I
just a
love
bunch
I
of
love
stuff
how
I
you
think that,
started this. I got to interrupt, Mike. I love how
yeah,
you started with privilege, and now like everything you're walking through is like huge challenges that a lot of people would never ever risk. Right? It took a tremendous amount of courage to take that leap, um, and so I'll let you continue with what advice would you give to folks who are on that fence?
yeah. I mean, if you're gonna start it, I would say, look, like I think there's good reasons to try and like de-risk it for yourself. I think it can give you that courage, right? Like, I mean, I think maybe there was less risk for us, but I do think that there's still sort of like you get to talk yourself into it. I think committing really to it makes a big difference. I see a lot of people that want to do things kind of like on the side. I think that's tough.
Mhm.
I think that can lead to more regret. Like, I'm glad we tried it, right? I mean, one, because I think it's actually worked pretty well. But I think if it hadn't worked and you were doing it part-time, I feel like you just would never know.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other thing I would say, honestly, this sounds so simple, but like if you just actually care about the people that you hire as people, not just as like your employees, I think it goes a long way towards just making good decisions. How, as CEO, what you do does impact other people. And so like you should just be super aware of that because it can be, I don't know. I mean, like it can be something simple like knowing that when I say to somebody that I don't normally have a meeting with, hey, do you want to check in on something on Thursday or whatever? Like, I try and tell them, like, this is not about your job performance or anything else. I mean, if it's genuinely not, because otherwise I think they're going to be scared. Like, that's like an anxiety or potentially, and it's an anxiety that like you can cause somebody and you could tell yourself, oh, they should know this is no big deal, but like maybe they don't. What if like put yourself in their shoes, what if the CEO that you never talked to said this to you? And I think of myself as a friendly, nice person, right? So like I don't think of myself as an intimidating
Mhm.
personality. But I think within swing education, like carrying the CEO title just raises the stakes on that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's true of every organization in the world, every client that we have. The CEO is, you and I are both pretty similar, I think, in that regard. Pretty friendly, genuinely. We cared
Yeah,
about the mission, we cared about people, and it wasn't about us. It's the
yeah,
CEO title by itself just carries a whole different weight to it that it's hard to fully appreciate. It's hard to appreciate when you're not the CEO, and it's hard to appreciate when you are the CEO because it's a
yeah,
very different perspective.
yeah, for sure.
I love the commit too, by the way. I think that's so valuable of advice that we often sort of, we'll say things like, well, I'm 90% committed, and there's no such thing. You're
Yeah,
either committed or you're not. You're either in the boat or you're not. If you're not, it's like you got one foot on the dock and one foot in the canoe. That's an
yeah,
awfully precarious place to be. That's not sustainable. So
yeah,
get back to the dock or get in the canoe.
yeah, for sure.
So time is flying by here. Maybe we can conclude with just kind of two things. One, just other advice you might give to young leaders out there who are looking to move up the ranks and become CEO someday. And then a book recommendation. I always like to ask for a book that you either reading now or that you really loved in your career path.
Yeah. Um, Other advice. I mean, like, I think I don't know. Some of this stuff again just sounds like pretty simple. I think people at Swing tend to think of myself or me as like very transparent with people. And I don't I half jokingly basically say that it's just to like simplify my life, like and not having to remember who I've told what to. Like it gets really complicated if you're telling different people different amounts of information, and it seems easier just to say this is where we draw the line. And like obviously I don't go into like personnel or personal information. Um, but other than that, I do think that that makes things really easy. Until I started Swing, I'd managed one person for 1 year in like my 12-year working career. And so I would say like even management has been largely like a new thing. And it really did just come down to like trying to remember what it was like always remembering or keeping in mind what it was like when I did report to somebody else. And I think that that's like that empathy is like really helpful to kind of keep in mind. I did have the benefit of having a lot of managers in my 12-year career. I think I counted it up as 14 managers over 12 years. I don't know what that says about the places I worked at. My co-founders would joke that I don't know what that says about me as a direct report. Maybe there's some truth
It
there
says
too.
something, Mike, but we don't have time to
It
get into
says
that
something, yeah.
today.
Uh, anyways, book recommendation. I was like giving this as a book recommendation because I think it's like kind of funny too. But after I was kind of decided that I was going to be the CEO, after we decided I was going to be the CEO, I ended up going on Amazon and just looking for like, I don't like startup I think I literally typed in startup CEO into the like search box to see what books would come up. And this book came up called Hot Seat, the Startup CEO Guide book, by this guy, Dan Shapiro. And I read it cover to cover. And I was like, this is great. I'm going to do so many of these things. And it was just super tactical. It was literally like, choose QuickBooks. don't don't screw around. Just choose QuickBooks, call it a day. Next stop, like, you know, look for an office this way. Here's a process for like hiring people. Here are the like 8 slides you need in your pitch deck, etc., so on and so forth down the line. I was like, this is amazing. And I think maybe Dan Shapiro is now on his 5th or 6th startup himself. I think multiple of which were actually acquired by Google. So he's doing well. And his book was very like easy. It didn't cause me to have to do a lot of deep thinking, which I think was nice.
You are already overloaded, so you're looking for some good, easy tactical advice.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the time, and this has been a lot of fun. It's been great to see you again and reconnect here.
Definitely. Same here.